Hey guys, welcome to Masquerade of Motherhood, or as I like to call it, the Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place where I am giving you permission to not have it all together.
Hey guys, welcome back. 2 weeks ago, I shared the story of Naomi, a wife, a widow, a mom, and a mother-in-law. A woman who faced great struggles and sorrows, but found strength in her relationship with God. If you haven't listened, go back to episode 105 to hear her story. Today, I want you to meet Ruth. And here's what I love about her. She's bold, she's a risk taker, she's willing, teachable, but most importantly, she's loyal. The book of Ruth is 4 short chapters in the Old Testament, packed with suspense, heartache, anticipation, and a love story to rival any modern-day romance novel. Ruth followed Naomi back to Bethlehem, where she knew no one, and would be in a position where she needed to provide for herself and her mother-in-law. To say times were tough is an understatement. In order to provide for the two of them, Ruth would go to the fields and glean grain from the already harvested fields. You see, she was getting the leftovers. Once the field had been harvested, the law of Moses stated that any grain dropped on the ground could be gleaned by the poor. Naomi and Ruth were poor. This was the only grain Ruth was able to gather, and ironically, it was a blessing, and both women acknowledged it as such. They recognized this law, this grain, was the Lord's kindness to them. Have you ever been in a situation where one thing happened after another that lined up so perfectly it was almost unbelievable? Maybe you've looked back and you've realized this quote-unquote happenstance wasn't happenstance at all, but kindness and redeeming that the Lord so masterfully put in place. I've shared bits and pieces of how we came to find this house that we're living in. One thing happened after another. We looked at one house that didn't work for our family. I went back alone to that house and prayed, considered options. I was attempting to find a road to turn around and happened upon an old abandoned church that led me down a road to another house for sale. Meeting after meeting at that particular house, and we were sold. The night that I was planning to write the contract, we took one final drive down the street to see if there was any evidence of children. A man happened to be in the road putting out his trash. A conversation began as we marveled at the similarity to the home we lost in Louisiana. He spontaneously asked if we wanted to buy his home. 2 weeks later, an agreement was made at a dining room table where his wife's Bible and study book laid from her last intimate moment with the Lord. As we drove away from a handshake deal, reeling with mixed emotions and shock of just how dark it was out on those country roads, the lingering question that I had for Scott was, "Do you think they deliver pizza out here?" What an odd question to ask after we were making one of the biggest decisions in our married life. As we waited at the stop sign for the approaching car, the headlights blinded us to what was resting on top. Pizza delivery, bright and bold on the rooftop sign. We both marveled at how quickly a simple request was answered. Pizza. One thing happened after another to lead us here. There is no mistaking that God had his hand in it, and he has a plan for us and this home. The question for all of us is, do we recognize God's hand in our lives? Naomi and Ruth sure did. When Ruth was out gathering grain, a man by the name of Boaz saw her. He provided her extra time to harvest grain, extra privileges, and protection. Ruth humbled herself in those fields. She was open and willing to do whatever was necessary to take care of herself and Naomi. Not only did Boaz notice her commitment, so did God. In the final chapters of this love story, Naomi instructs Ruth on how to prepare herself for Boaz. Wash yourself, anoint yourself with perfume, change your garments, go to him, lay at his feet, and give of yourself. This wasn't a sexual invitation, but it was one of showing respect to Boaz, one of giving herself to God to do as he wanted to do in her life, as well as showing Boaz that she would be his bride if he would have her. You see, Boaz was thrilled, though, because he knew that Ruth was a virtuous woman, kind and giving. Boaz became her kinsman redeemer, her Goel. You may be asking, what is a kinsman redeemer and what is a Goel? Well, a kinsman redeemer was a relative who would volunteer to take responsibility for extended family when a woman's husband had died. The nearest relative to the deceased husband could marry the widow so that she would not live in poverty. Similar to how we are redeemed by Jesus, taking the place of our sin, our hopelessness, and guaranteeing us eternal inheritance. Jesus is our Goel. Boaz and Ruth went on to be married and to have a child whose name is Obed, which means worshipped. Naomi became that child's caregiver. We have seen these two women cling to one another and support one another. Ruth has cared for her mother-in-law, and Naomi has mentored Ruth. The transition for these women from despair, loneliness, feeling cheated in life to seeing what God had planned for them all along. One that would bring them back to Him, back to pleasant, lovely, and friendly. Tragedy turned into beauty. One thing, quote unquote, happening, then another. Like Naomi, we have to be wise to see it. In Proverbs 9, wisdom is explained beautifully. The author paints a picture between a woman of wisdom and a woman of folly, two complete opposites, but both could be enticing to us. I guess the next question is, which one do you choose? Naomi is a clear example of someone who knows how to be wise and someone who has chosen folly. Proverbs 3:17 and 18 says this, "Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed." Isn't it amazing that we discussed how Naomi's name means pleasant, and this scripture describes just that, a wise woman and her pleasant ways. Her paths are peace, a tree of life to those who take hold of her. They will be blessed. You see, Ruth took hold. She clung to Naomi, and ultimately her life was blessed once again by a relationship not only with her mother-in-law, but her future husband Boaz. She is blessed abundantly for her wisdom, a wisdom that was modeled by Naomi. I'm in awe of Naomi's relationship with the Lord. It's very authentic, and it is shared in this book. She wasn't superficial in her feelings. She didn't shy away from being honest with her pain. She had freedom in her faith to be honest in how she was feeling and what she needed to be made whole again. But isn't that what relationships should look like? Honest, open, surrendering to the one we love to know us through and through. This is an example of our relationship with God. We need to be more like Naomi, but also like Ruth. Ruth cared for Naomi. She listened to her advice. She took risks, and she was loyal. My takeaway after learning about these two women is that I want to become more like Naomi. I want to be more pleasant, committed, willing to mentor, willing to listen and to keep my eyes open to God's plan, and less willing to look at situations as ones where I believe maybe the grass is greener on the other side. Praying for wisdom, not folly. Praying for authentic relationships, intimate and deep versus superficial, especially when it comes to my relationship with the Lord. I want to be more like Ruth. I want to be willing to take advice. I want to be teachable. I want to take care of those who love me and work hard, knowing that God's plan is perfect. As moms, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz all have characteristics we could teach and instill in our children. We could teach them to be devoted, hardworking, kind, pleasant, merciful, aware, encouraging, generous, kind, faithful, but most importantly, dependent on God. Until next time.
If you want to print, screenshot, or share this week's verse, head to the show notes where you're going to find a link to my website and a graphic for you to use. Thanks so much for listening to Masquerade of Motherhood with Courtney Doyle. We want to be sure this blesses you and other mothers. And in order to do this, first, you must subscribe. This way you won't ever miss an episode. Also, if you'll rate and review this podcast on iTunes or wherever you're listening, this will increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.